one of the goals of today's conversation is to address racial bias in philanthropy. And so in your experience, what are some specific barriers or biases from within philanthropic organizations that you believe are hindering community-centered organizations led by people of color in accessing adequate funding or support? And Carlos or Dr. Lopez, whoever would like to jump in first here, please go ahead.
I think one of the things that feels really important to address is this notion that we just need minor tweaks, right? Like we just need to be better at reaching out to communities of color, or we just need this program to be a little bit more culturally specific, or we just need to translate our approach and our strategy into a different language, right? That these sort of little tweaks are actually going to change century-long racist structures, right? That the system was built on, right? That this economic system that we are in that produces inequity, right, was intentional. It was built this way for a reason, right? And so in order to shift that, it's going to take something very different, right? It needs to be replaced. And so I think foundations are often worried about taking those big risks and thinking outside of the box, or letting go of some of that power, right? That is needed in order to really have some other group of folks help decide, or not help, I'm sorry, to lead what needs to be done differently, right? And I will say one more thing. Carlos also mentioned earlier, right? This notion of our state of economics is so much measured and understood in an individual and in a household level, right? And that is not justice, right? And particularly when you think about BIPOC communities, right? Most of our communities don't think like that. They don't think just about me or my household. They think about, my cousins or my auntie or, my neighbors, my community, right? It's a very different perspective, a more holistic perspective, if you will. So I think oftentimes when we get stuck in those dominant ways and thinking about little tweaks, we're still sort of replicating these ideas of individuals and households, or what's going to change, or what's going to balance the scale of inequity, of economic inequity, but it's really not. We have to think at the group level and the community level. And so I think those are places where philanthropy needs to challenge itself and do differently.
I agree, Carlos.
I'd add, thank you for that, Dr. Lopez. I think I would add, I think one of the things that I come to when I think about that question and what I've seen is that, we are all a part of this system that has perpetuated these inequalities for a very long time. And I think there is a need to be able to acknowledge the history that got us to this place, right? That we're on stolen lands, that we have an extractive economy. It has been built on Blacks and other people of color. And we operate within a culture and a narrative that sustains those oppressive policies and practices that have and continue to be extractive, right? And so until any organization, any institution goes through their own internal work to figure out what that means for themselves, that I can't then expect them to act in a different way because they haven't done their own internal work. So I think it starts there with philanthropy doing their own work to figure out what that actually means for them. And then we I think then shift to, we all have a role to play in shifting, and especially for philanthropy, who holds power in terms of those resources that are desperately needed in building a different, more capacity, other resources to be able to do the work in community, I think is needed. We've had a lot of conversations with BIPOC-led organizations who have said this idea around trust-based philanthropy practices is what's needed, right? And I think that this isn't new information that philanthropy hasn't had, but are they living up to their values and their equity statements and really putting these values into practice and trusting community-based organizations to do the work, to giving them general operating funding to support the back-end work that is vital to doing the work, and also just reducing the whatever barriers to reporting requirements for putting out dollars. And I think, and then the other thing is just sustaining and supporting BIPOC-led organizations with larger, more longer-term funding that's dedicated. And Dr. Lopez, you've mentioned this many times, and it's not about just fully funding organizations, but an oversaturation of funding that's really needed to counterbalance the decades, centuries of oppressive systems that have been in place.
Well, and the systems that still have yet to be fixed, right? So at the same time, we're trying to do it all. And so, thank you for that to both of you. I think about the book by Anand Giridharadas, Winners Take All, right? And really understanding the issue of the concept of philanthropy from the beginning, right? And really needing to shift how we consider, shift how we think about that. And I'd really like to lift up Dr. Carmen Rojas, who is leading the Margaret Casey Foundation in Washington State right now, and her Freedom Scholars program that she just launched, which is really looking at unrestricted support and funding without all of these kind of tiresome reporting processes that are there, and all these goals that need to be set, but really funding folks who've been doing the work to really consider, sit, think, and consider what needs to happen next. And that trust-based philanthropy, I think, not only is going to seed some amazing, incredible work, but is a direction that many philanthropists can certainly look at and start to model themselves after. So thank you both for that. As the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable is a shared table with philanthropic organizations working towards more inclusive funding practices, what is one piece of advice or what would you like to see funders do differently that you would share with funders when connecting or partnering with organizations and communities? Dr. Lopez, I'll go to you first.
Well, I think what we've all heard for a while now is that communities have the solutions to their own problems. I don't think saying that is a new radical idea. What is new and different, I think, and radical is how we fund that. And we fund that by letting culturally specific groups come up with their own strategies. And we do that by that oversaturation of funding, as Carlos mentioned. We do that by providing whatever support they agree to that they need or will accept, right? And we give them time to really develop strategies that will move us forward. Oftentimes, the most marginalized communities are consistently in crisis. There's no time to sit and think and plan and gather what our values are, what our strategies are, what our strengths are, right? Community needs time to do that. They need time to be with one another, to develop relationships, to develop trust, just like we're asking you to do with communities, right? Communities also need that time with themselves. So we can't do you can't ask a group of Black folks to give them a little bit of dollars and tell them to fix all these problems in 1 year, right? Like this is, they need to be funded over a long time frame with a lot of support, and you need to trust in their strategies, and you need to let them evaluate whether or not those strategies are successful or not. And then also we need to try to connect that, right? If we begin culturally specific and then we start thinking cross-culturally, right? How can then the strategies of Black folks here who've come up with these ideas about economic justice, how do they support also these Latine strategies or these Native and Indigenous strategies, right? And the list goes on. And at that point, then we can start doing really collaborative work, but it really has to begin at the group level, because that is where the folks know they have that, that double consciousness, right? To channel Du Bois, they understand what it is to live in the dominant economic system and what that world's like. And they also know what it is to live in that world as a Black person or a Native person, right? Or a Latine person, and what that means culturally and symbolically and materially, right? And so those folks, they do have the answers, but they need the resources, they need the capacity building, they need the technical assistance, and they need the time to lead us forward with new ways and new strategies.
I agree. And I also think, and Carlos, I'll go to you next. I mean, just listening when they say that, because there are times, right? I think there's so many different groups who've decided to just produce their own thing that literally shares what their values are. And then oftentimes philanthropy will ask again, because it doesn't sound like what we want to hear, right? So oftentimes I think also just listening and that trusting them means if they've said this, this is what it is. And I think reassessing it and re-understanding how to listen in a way that is true to what is being asked. I think values and perspectives and needs of communities of color aren't far off in some, other universe, right? They want their families and their children and their loved ones and the larger community to be safe and to thrive. And finding a way to that oftentimes is not like some rocket science that hasn't been thought of, but listening to communities first, especially when they've already been telling us for decades and, for a long time, like this is what listening. Carlos?
I would just add an uplift that I think even as we've had these conversations around the roundtable, one of the things it's apparent is that this is about relationship, and it's about building relationship and building trusting relationships. And I think again, taking the time to really do that and do it in an authentic way and not in this transactional way. That requires philanthropy and all of us to be transparent about what it is that we're actually after, and are we genuinely, interested in having these long-term relationships that I think are needed to really have these hard conversations, to explore different opportunities, to be able to trust our partners in doing the work. And we're gonna need to be able to do that in a way that really centers community, and that again also puts the onus not just on community-based organizations, but that philanthropy is also asking, what are we doing to build those relationships, to open those avenues of access and power into the resources and the money that we have. And it's not, I think it's not even only that, right? But it's like connection to other information, to other resources, to other funding opportunities that are needed for our communities to be able to thrive.
I agree. Really, it's like get to the table, right? And it's not about funders building a table and saying, come to ours. I think the magic of, I don't even know, magic is probably the wrong term because it's really just hard work, right? But the brilliance of the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable is that it is in fact that the funder, needs to be able to be there to listen and to hear and to start shifting. And that happens when you've been there long enough, when you understand and build those relationships and trust, moving at the pace of trust. And so thank you for that. Thank you both so much for this amazing conversation. I, would like to ask you, Carlos, can you just tell us how funders can connect if they are in fact interested in learning more about or supporting the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable?
Thanks for that question, Shabri. The Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable is a shared table of economic justice advocates and funders, and the Asset Funders Network is one of our partners. So more information can be found on the Oregon page of the AFN's website, and funders can either contact Annette Case from AFN or myself to learn more about how you can get involved. We can't do this work alone, and we invite you to engage, to fund, and to get involved with the roundtable.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And, I just want to come back for a moment of gratitude. Thank you for your brilliance and for your time spent with us today. Dr. Lopez, were you about to say something? I don't want to cut you off short at all.
No, just wanted to say thank you. And we have been, the Roundtable has supported some really great statewide research, or actually it's national level. Really, we've reached out to foundations and organizations across the nation to produce a racial wealth gap report. And that report will be live on our website soon. So please look to the coalition's website to read more about some of the research we did and some of the strategies that will be informing the roundtable moving forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez. And again, your brilliance today, your time spent with us today, are all valued and appreciated. Thank you both for your time spent today, and thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Shabri.